What is the mind afraid of when it refuses to let go of a person or situation? This question doesn't have a short answer. So let's start at the beginning. This morning, you opened your eyes and stepped into the shower, but your mind was already on coffee. While you were having breakfast, you tasted nothing. Your head was rehearsing everything waiting at work. During the day, all you wanted was for the shift to end. When you finally walked out, you rushed towards your transport thinking about dinner. And before you noticed it, the sun had gone down, the day was over, and now something is stopping you from falling asleep. Your attention has already migrated to tomorrow's obligations. The journey ended, and you were never truly there for it. This chronic emptiness is not a concentration problem. It is an automatic mechanism your mind performs with frightening precision, staying somewhere else, keeping discomfort alive while fleeing reality. For 25 centuries, Buddhism has studied this escape with a precision no other system of thought has matched. What you're about to hear explains why your mind prefers familiar suffering to unknown silence. Someone mocked you a few days ago, maybe weeks ago. That person went on with life, forgot their own words, and probably no longer remembers you exist. But you are still there, turning it over in the middle of the night, chewing the same poison, replaying the gesture, the tone, the exact flavor of contempt. Your body reacts as if the insult were happening in your room right now. The stimulus vanished from physical reality long ago, yet the inner torture remains active because the mind holds the mockery and refuses to release it, trapped in a loop of resentment. The contemplative traditions discovered that most human suffering does not come from the event itself, but from the extra pain we add afterwards. There is an initial impact that may be unavoidable, but real suffering arises from mental resistance to reality. Buddhist wisdom says the wind that agitates the mind is craving, the burning demand that something should happen, or that something should stop happening. We sink into distress when we insist that life obey our timing and reject what is appearing now. When this idea sounds too abstract, look at the body. The oppressive heat rising through the chest, the knot tightening in the throat, the jaw preparing for a battle nobody can see. The whole body is fighting an invisible war, spending energy against an event that already happened and cannot be changed in any way. You are not suffering only from what they said. You are suffering from the repetition, from the mind's refusal to let reality be finished. The Buddha taught that the past can become a very narrow prison. The danger of that cell is not that external forces keep us locked inside. It is that we get used to it. It traps us because it is predictable, because it belongs to our known story, and because it offers a strangely comfortable identity. The identity of the victim. We want to remain victims a little longer because past suffering explains us to others and to ourselves. Leaving that role means walking into the unknown without the stories that justify our daily bitterness. Identifying with old tragedies clouds awareness and stops the flow of life. Memories become anchors that drag every attempt to move forwards back into the same dark water. Buddhist wisdom offers a clear map through a simple physical fact. An object is heavy only while you are holding it in the air. Put it on the floor or on a table, and immediately it stops weighing on your hand. The weight was never in the historical object alone. It was in the hand that refused to open. If you let go of the tragic experience that has nothing new to teach you, the pain begins to end because the effort of holding it ends. Carrying what can no longer be changed is the decision the mind makes silently every morning without asking permission. We spend days, months, or years dragging weights that should have been left on the road long ago, convinced that protecting our pain is the only way to protect ourselves. If the mechanism of clinging to suffering is so obvious and destructive, the real question is not how to open the hand, but why your mind believes it must keep living in that cell. What does it fear would happen if the story ended? Who would you be without the wound rehearsed every night? The answer is uncomfortable. The mind often prefers familiar pain to unknown freedom, because freedom demands an identity it has not learned to trust yet fully. The Buddhist contemplative tradition identifies the discursive mind as the uninterrupted stream of concepts, judgments, and inner narratives that stands between pure awareness and reality. This mechanism doubles existence. Instead of perceiving the world directly, the mind instantly manufactures a linguistic replica of everything it experiences, turning life into an object of constant analysis. For Buddhism, this verbal flow is not a sign of intelligence or a harmless brain function, but the root of a deep disconnection that condemns us to inhabit a simulation made of words. Awareness becomes trapped in the habit of naming, labeling, and classifying every phenomenon, and loses the capacity to meet the present in its raw state, free of projection. This constant production of inner stories distorts perception and sabotages the simplest moments of life. It happens when you are eating a delicious meal and, instead of tasting it fully, a voice in your head begins judging the salt, the texture, or planning tomorrow's obligations. The sensory experience dissolves beneath commentary, just as a walk through a beautiful sunlit park becomes a mental rehearsal of unanswered emails or old arguments. We have grown so used to this filter that we often prefer abstract representation to raw contact with existence. It is the same detour that leads parents to attend their child's school performance and, instead of meeting the child's shining eyes in real time, hold up a phone to capture the event. They watch through glass, obsessed with framing, losing the living vibration of the moment in the attempt to own a digital record. This systematic disconnection drags us into a state where simulation completely replaces life. We move through our days with eyes open, yet spiritually asleep, devoured by judgments and opinions. No one is fully inhabiting the body. If you pause with complete honesty right now, as you listen to these words, you may notice that part of you is already judging the tone of the voice, comparing these ideas with something you read before, or wondering how much longer the video will last. That voice commenting on the explanation is the commentary placing itself between the teaching and your awareness. The first great achievement in the Buddhist meditative tradition is not reaching altered states or mystical trances, but something far more radical: getting that inner commentator to fall silent for a moment. When the discursive mind stops, experience becomes clean, direct, and intensely lucid. It is like wiping mud from a windscreen during a storm. Suddenly, the landscape appears with astonishing clarity. You have tasted this relief spontaneously while watching the untamable sea, or when receiving news so shocking that thought froze for a few seconds and pure presence returned. Quieting mental noise opens the door to a dimension where things simply are, free from the weight of our daily labels and classifications. When we remove the subtitles we impose on the world, we discover that reality did not need to be corrected, explained, or evaluated in order to make sense. The mind's blind insistence on keeping that background noise alive is not accidental, and it is not a factory defect. It is a shield, designed with astonishing precision to protect us from what waits behind silence. That is why the mind keeps talking even when nothing needs to be solved. It would rather give you a problem, an opinion, or an old memory than let you meet the naked immediacy of being. Silence threatens its authority. In silence, there is no narrator to defend, no image to polish, no wound to rehearse. There is only the raw present, and the possibility that what you are is much wider than the voice describing it. That is what the next stage exposes for us. Buddhism explains that clinging is not a simple behavioral mistake, but the logical result of a basic cognitive distortion. At the root of psychological experience lives an almost existential fear, a deep anxiety caused by losing contact with our pure, natural condition. To defend itself from that vulnerability, the mind invents the myth of ego. the illusion of a solid, independent, permanent identity. Once this fictional me is established, the mechanism completes itself by projecting outward a world of equally solid, absolute objects, to which we assign arbitrary value. From that artificial split between subject and object, an endless battle begins. We chase what we believe will complete us, and we fight what we perceive as a threat. The ego becomes a tireless collector, trying to stabilize a reality that is, by nature, changing. Existence becomes a fortress we defend in desperation. This need for control projects itself destructively onto time, turning the future into the second great chain of consciousness. The discursive mind no longer merely imagines the days ahead. It colonizes them with rigid expectations that operate like merciless demands placed on reality. We confuse the healthy preference for certain outcomes with the neurotic requirement that life happen exactly as we want, on our terms, inside our deadlines. Right now, as you listen to these words, bring to mind a recent project that was delayed, or a conversation that did not go the way you expected. Notice that the suffering you felt did not come from the change itself, but from the violent collision between raw facts and the mental template you had already designed. Demanding that the universe fit your expectations is as absurd as raging at the weather because it rains on your wedding day. Frustration immediately becomes physical, a hollow discomfort in the stomach, the bodily signal that the mind is trying to bend reality into its molds. Against this inertia, Buddhist wisdom completely redefines abundance. The truly rich person is not the one who owns more possessions or gathers more experiences, but the one who needs the present to be different the least. Genuine satisfaction is not found in the exhausting attempt to rearrange the world to fill an inner emptiness. It is found in cultivating contentment, the ability to appreciate what appears without depending on it to support your identity. When you stop demanding that people behave exactly as you wish, or that circumstances align perfectly, the mind rests because the mechanism of chronic discontent begins to shut down. While that dependency remains active, the mind will resist letting go of its projections with all its strength. It behaves like a desert nomad who never stops to enjoy the oasis before him, because he is convinced the grass will be greener, the water purer, and life fuller in the next valley. That forced march towards the horizon reveals the hidden logic sustaining suffering. The mind says, not this, not here, not yet. And every time you believe it, you trade the only real moment for an imagined salvation. Clinging is not love for life. It is mistrust of life as it is. Freedom begins when you see the demand forming, feel it in the body, and refuse to build an identity around it. Then the present is no longer an obstacle. It becomes enough, exactly where you stand. Buddhist tradition warns that some experiences stop being passing thoughts and become tattoos on the mind. While most inner comments cross awareness like clouds that dissolve, certain events are carved into the psyche and turn into an invisible but lasting possession. This mechanism alters our structure deeply. The tattooed memory stops being a fact from the past and becomes a fixed filter through which we read the present. The mind clings to that mark because it gives a false feeling of solidity, preferring the stiffness of a familiar scar to the uncertainty of a clean awareness exposed to what is new. Without noticing, we end up ruled by old marks, reacting to today's world from the fear of an experience that ended years ago. The danger of these engravings is that they act like heavy anchors, blocking any possibility of spiritual growth. The Tibetan master Deshung Rinpoche described this state with an unforgettable image: a tiny bird shaking its wings desperately, beating its feathers with all the force it has, yet unable to take off because stones are tied to its feet, no matter how hard it flaps or how much energy it spends trying. The dead weight cancels its nature and condemns it to remain stuck to the ground. We carry these rocks voluntarily, mistaking them for survival tools. They are not only chemical dependencies or obvious addictions, but subtle things. An old resentment we keep feeding at night, a version of ourselves that has already died but that we refuse to bury, or an identity built around the suffering we endured. Pause right now and name the specific argument you had last week that still leaves a bitter taste in your mouth whenever you remember it. That is one stone in your own collection. This imbalance resembles the mistake of a beginner traveler packing for a long journey. Driven by insecurity and fear of the unexpected, he stuffs his backpack with everything he thinks he might need in the worst possible scenario. After a few miles under an unforgiving sun, he discovers bitterly that most of those objects are useless, and that the weight meant to protect him has become his greatest enemy. Buddhist wisdom proposes beginning the journey by dropping ballast through the concrete act of giving without expecting anything in return, giving away objects you no longer use, offering time, or giving affection with no demand for recognition or repayment. This physical exercise cuts the bond of possession that ties us to things and weakens the mind's resistance. It teaches the body that release is not death, but movement. At first, giving may feel unsafe, because the ego believes every object, story, and grievance is proof that it exists. But with each small act of generosity, the grip loosens. The mind sees that nothing essential disappears when something unnecessary leaves. Until then, every complaint, possession, and wound remains a stone. Not because life tied it there forever, but because some frightened part of you still secretly calls its familiar weight protection. In the end, the bird does not need an outside force to cut the ropes. True awakening occurs when the creature realizes its own claw is still closed around the cord, and that absolute freedom begins at the exact instant it chooses to let go. Egocentrism is not a moral flaw to be judged, but a faulty psychological architecture that automatically generates human suffering. By placing personal well-being at the absolute center of existence, the mind activates a permanent state of alert, reading the environment as a constant threat to its safety. From this self-referential loop, where the dominant thought becomes me, for me and mine, arise anger at obstacles, attachment to pleasure, and constant fear of losing what has been gained. The mind resists dismantling this structure with enormous force because it confuses the loosening of that centrality with the death of its identity. It assumes, wrongly, that protecting this rigid core is the only strategy available for surviving in a hostile world. Indian Buddhist monk Shantideva, writing in the 8th century, dismantled this illusion in his classic work, the Bodhicharyavatara. He compressed the dynamics of the human psyche into 2 precise lines that carry the weight of a mathematical law. All the happiness in the world comes from caring for others. All the suffering in the world comes from caring for oneself. This is not merely a mystical saying or a pious instruction. Modern empirical studies have pointed in the same direction by examining language patterns in groups of people. Individuals who use self-referential words such as I, me, my, and mine more frequently in daily conversation tend to show higher levels of unhappiness, psychological distress, and even greater vulnerability to physical and chronic illness. This correspondence reveals a dense psychological paradox. The obsessive attempt to secure personal happiness is exactly what destroys it, while shifting attention towards the well-being of others begins to dissolve inattention. If you examine your inner and outer conversations from the last few hours with total honesty, you will probably notice that most of your recent discomfort came from tracking what they did to you, what you do not have, or how someone else wounded your sensitivity. The ego keeps an accountant inside the mind, recording debts, offenses, absences, and comparisons. It turns life into a courtroom where every person becomes either a threat, a debtor, or a witness to your importance. At the exact moment that fixation becomes unbearable, use a conscious physical anchor. Deliberately direct your attention towards easing a real burden for someone close to you. Send the message, Wash the dishes no one asked you to wash. Listen without turning the conversation back to yourself. Give something useful without announcing it. Almost immediately, you may feel an opening in the chest, the space where ego pressure retreats and a cleaner calm appears. Genuine love from a contemplative view is not a romantic feeling. It is the radical act of releasing the sovereignty of the personal self and entering a dimension where existence is experienced as directly unified. This does not mean neglecting your body, your boundaries, or your needs. It means seeing that the small self becomes sick when it is treated as the only reality. Care for others is not self-abandonment. It is the medicine that breaks isolation. If this path to relief is so verifiable and liberating, it is disturbing that the mind prefers guarding its prison instead. Meditative practice is not a method for collecting spiritual achievements or extraordinary experiences, but the radical act of letting go. Its power lies in dismantling traumas rooted in the past, dissolving anxious projections into the future, and softening the neurotic demands we place on reality. There is a verifiable law in the contemplative tradition. Your degree of inner freedom is directly proportional to the amount of weight you can release. When you withdraw the conditions you impose on the present before allowing yourself peace, awareness stops behaving like a merciless judge and begins to receive experience through clean openness, where each phenomenon is met without needing to be corrected, retained, or owned. This conscious emptiness draws a clear line between genuine freedom and the false freedom sold by contemporary culture. The common idea that freedom means doing whatever you feel like in each moment is really a subtle slavery disguised as sovereignty. Buddhist wisdom says that behind many automatic impulses you mistake for personal desire, there is an unconscious pattern governing you without permission. Recall the moment within the last hour when you felt a sudden need to check your phone for no real reason. You thought you were choosing freely, but you were pulled by a reactive mechanism designed to escape boredom. Eckhart Tolle agrees when he says, the ego thrives in psychological time, trapping the person in automatic reactions that erase the ability to respond consciously to life. When you cannot govern your own impulses, the supposed freedom of choice becomes an invisible captivity in which the body obeys a fragmented mind. Against this inertia, genuine happiness reveals itself not as pleasant agitation, but as unshakable peace that does not depend on the environment changing. Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught that mindfulness is the antidote to the mind that comments and demands. It allows you to appreciate beauty when it appears without forming a dependency that becomes suffering when the stimulus disappears. This is not a denial of pleasure. It is learning to inhabit your own skin with contentment that does not need external validation or possessions to hold itself together. True transformation begins with a concrete shift in attitude, radical acceptance of who you are in this instant, while still allowing improvement without the idealized fantasies manufactured by egocentrism. When the voices of contemplative traditions are brought together, they reveal the same principle. Freedom is not won by adding more elements to your story, but by emptying the structure that sustained your pain. When the mind finally stops trying to bend the universe to its measure, a space opens that has not yet been named. That space is not blankness or defeat. It is the first taste of a life no longer organized around resistance. You still act, choose, work, and love, but the hidden demand that everything must obey your fear begins to fade. Each surrendered expectation removes another bar from the cage. Each mindful breath proves that you can be here without escaping. And in that simple presence, the suffering you defended for years loses its authority. The mind feared emptiness because it imagined annihilation there. But what appears is spaciousness, steadiness, and the quiet freedom of needing nothing extra to be whole now. Letting go is not something you do once in order to reach a final destination, but a circular process renewed with every breath. Inner peace is not conquered by collecting techniques or memorizing complex theories. It reveals itself as awareness removes its defenses. The more you abandon the need to control your surroundings, the more free space opens inside you. You have touched this in brief silences, when the weight of the world seemed to vanish. Contemplative wisdom teaches that freedom is not a future reward, but the natural state that appears when you stop building daily obstacles, mental walls, and artificial barriers that fracture the present moment. When the mind releases what it held so desperately, rigid expectations, automatic patterns, and an identity built on past suffering, the noise falls away and another dimension is exposed. Carl Jung recognized this in Western depth psychology when he named the self, the psychic reality that transcends the ego and moves silently, ancient and real, beneath our everyday masks. Slow your thoughts now and notice the space between words. There is a constant presence in you, something that has not changed, even as your personal story has transformed. It is pure awareness watching life flow without being wounded by the storms of discursive thought or idealized projection. To inhabit that space, you must destroy the most basic certainty you have carried until now, the belief that peace is a goal to achieve later. The Buddhist answer is disturbing because it says peace is not constructed through effort. It is discovered when you stop performing the actions that hide it. You kept searching for a manual that would teach you how to let go, without noticing the question was wrong from the beginning, because it assumed you needed to do something more. Your mind refuses to release that person or situation because the ego is convinced it will disappear if it abandons control. It does not see that the stillness you crave has always been here, intact, available, waiting for you to stop marching towards nowhere. When you withdraw the artificial demand that reality fit your molds and understand the emptiness from which your defenses arise, you discover that relief consists in no longer holding the fictions that justify daily bitterness. The resistance of thought is not a biological mistake. It is a protection built to preserve the centrality of an identity afraid of its own silence. This is why letting go feels like danger. The ego hears surrender and translates it as death, even when what is dying is only the story that made suffering necessary. Behind all the noise described in this journey, there is an unchanging presence observing cleanly. It does not argue with experience, and it does not need your biography to prove it exists. It waits beneath craving, memory, resentment, and fear. Every time you stop feeding the commentary, you sense it. Every time you open the hand, it shines. Behind the last word, there remains only a threshold that has been waiting for you for an eternity. Step through it, not by becoming someone else, but by recognizing the silent life that was never trapped in the first place and has always been free, here, now, already. And that concludes our video. If you enjoyed the content as much as we did, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your feedback and suggestions for future videos. And don't forget to turn on notifications to stay up to date with all our updates. Thanks for being part of our community. See you in the next video.